This time set continuance to the Churchill County Sheriff versus 34 Horses, case 12CV00136. State's represented by Deputy Attorney Michael Wynn. Miss Dorothy Robertson's present in court. You're going to get an attorney. What?
The attorneys that I have spoken with, including several here in town, have said that since there are no charges filed against me, there's no criminal case against me at this point, they can't take the case.
All right, the state, you want to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor. Before we begin, this is a continuation of the hearing set for September 12th, at which time Ms. Robertson asked that she seek the advice of counsel. So we just want to go on record with a knowledgeable waiver that she doesn't seek the advice of counsel, and that anything she says here today will offer immunity in any other further proceedings, just so that she understands that.
You understand that?
I don't understand that.
Does she want to continue without the advice of counsel?
I'm not acting as my own counsel.
State have any suggestions?
Your Honor, if she's had a week now to seek counsel, if she's indicated that she's attempted to, but nobody will represent her, she's free to go forward today as representing herself, and we see nothing at this point. We see nothing wrong with that. We just want her to be aware that if she does proceed without counsel, we are offering immunity for anything that.
You understand that, Mr. Robertson?
No, sir.
That means that if there's any criminal charges that are being brought up in this case, they're not going to bring them up against you. Anything you say will not be used against you. Do you understand that?
I understand that, but I also understand that if I make errors in representing myself, that would preclude any further legal action on my part against the people that took my animals. In other words, if my animals are wrongly seized and I make an error in some part of this, I could eliminate my possibility of any kind of legal action based on that wrongful seizure.
Your Honor, at the resolution of this hearing, it should be determined whether or not this seizure was in fact lawful, and we are here today to determine the disposition of these 34 horses. And so if we were to make a determination based on the evidence presented that the horses were seized lawfully and that the correct decision was made, then she would have no further basis for litigation as far as who to proceed against. Plus, the statute immunizes any deputy working in his lawful capacity against civil action for the seizure of animals based on what he perceives as neglect.
We'll continue on. You've had the right to get an attorney, and we're going to continue on with the seizures of the horses, see if it was lawful, and if the court determines that the horses were taken because of they were neglect, and if the court finds that the horses will be auctioned or sold. You may continue.
Okay, Your Honor, the state has 4 witnesses. At this time, I'd like to call Deputy Ronnie Bell.
Stay here and take your oath, sir.
Okay. Do you solemnly swear affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God and under the pains and penalties of perjury?
I do. Will you please state your name and spell your last name?
Ronald James Bell, Jr., B-E-L-L.
And Deputy Bell, what is your occupation?
I work for the Churchill County Sheriff's Office.
How long have you been employed with the Churchill County Sheriff's Office?
9 years.
Do you have any training, experience, or education that qualifies you to be a Churchill County Sheriff's Deputy?
I do.
Do you have any training, experience, or education with respect to animal cruelty or neglect?
In just prior cases and speaking with veterinarians.
To how many reports of animal neglect have you responded within your career?
I couldn't give you an exact number.
How many of those cases of animal neglect involved horses? An approximate number.
Several.
Per your training and experience, what criteria do you use to determine whether a horse has been neglected?
The ribs and hips, if you can see bones, their bones sticking out, them being thin, long hooves, sometimes their teeth.
And were you employed by the Churchill County Sheriff's Department on July 1st of 2012?
Yes, sir.
Did you have the occasion to respond to a report of possible animal neglect on that date?
Yes, sir.
What information did you receive that caused you to respond to this incident of animal neglect?
Dispatch sent me a call from an anonymous caller saying that the horses were in bad shape at 3594 Hillsborough.
And did this tip reference any specific horse or describe any conditions in particular?
Not that I recall.
And where did you respond?
3594 Hillsborough.
Is that within Churchill County?
Yes, sir.
What did you do upon arriving at this location?
Contacted Mrs. Robertson, advised her the complaint that we had received, and asked her if we could look at all our horses.
And with whom did you make contact with?
Mrs. Robertson.
And do you see that person in the courtroom today?
Yes, sir.
Could you point to and describe that person?
Miss Robertson, she's wearing a gray t-shirt.
Let the record reflect Deputy Bale has identified the person seated in the respondent's chair.
The record will so reflect.
Did you explain to the respondent the purpose of your visit?
That I needed to check on the condition of the horses, yes.
Did she indicate whether she understood?
I don't recall.
So did you observe any of the horses on the property?
Yes.
And how many horses did you observe?
I didn't take an individual count. However, there were quite a few on the property.
Did she make any statements regarding ownership of the horses?
She said they were hers.
Did you ask whether she resided on that property?
I didn't.
So what observations with regards to the horses and their conditions did you make?
Some of the horses were thin, not to the point, from my experiences and talking with veterinarians and whatnot, that they were neglected. The hooves were not long. I think there was 3 that were longer, but they weren't to the point where they were starting to flatten out and curl over, which is an indication of neglect from lack of care for the hooves. There was a colt there that she said had shingles. I'm not sure what that is. She also indicated that she had a lady in Pershing County was taking care of her horses, and apparently not very well, so she brought them all to her property.
Did the horses have access to food and water?
There was food on the property and water. I couldn't tell you if they had been fed that day or not.
Did she indicate as to how the horses were being watered?
She's indicated to me she didn't have electricity on the property, therefore she couldn't get water out of her well, but she was going down the street to a friend's house and hauling water each day.
So did you observe what you thought were all the horses on the property?
As far as I know, yes.
Okay. And based on your observations, were you able to make any sort of determination or conclusion about whether these horses had been neglected?
At that time, I didn't feel they had been neglected.
And did you discuss the situation with the respondent?
Yes.
Did she indicate she understood?
Mm-hmm.
What specifically did you tell her in regards to the horses?
That the 3 with the longer hooves, I felt they needed to be trimmed. She said she does her own trimming and would work on getting it done.
Okay, and did you inform the respondent that you would follow up?
Yes.
Did you?
I drove back by several times. I never contacted Ms. Robertson again, though.
What were your observations upon your follow-ups?
No change.
And by that, you...
As far as the body condition of the horses that I had seen before, I didn't see anything worse. I didn't.
I have no more questions.
Have any questions of this witness, ma'am?
So you saw the old buckskin paint stallion in his pen?
I can't say for sure, ma'am. There was a lot of horses there. There was horses. There was a horse in the front by the corner of the property. There were some sheds in the middle to the south of the property, a shed with corrals there. And there was a pasture in the back with a lot of the horses.
When you did your follow-ups, did you actually come on the property and see the horses?
No, ma'am. Your gate's always closed.
So your follow-ups, could you see any of the horses in the pens, below the pen, behind the sheds?
Not that I recall, ma'am.
Could you see the mares in the pasture from your follow-ups?
With binoculars, yes.
I don't think I got any other questions at this point.
Nothing based on that, Your Honor.
This witness excused.
Yes, Your Honor.
We excuse this deputy, ma'am, to go back to work.
Yes, sir.
You're excused.
Thank you.
State calls Deputy Mel Habinez.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God, and other pains and penalties of perjury?
I do. Could you please state your name and spell your last name?
Melvin Habinez, last name spelled Jabines.
Deputy Habinez, what is your occupation?
I'm a deputy sheriff of Church County Sheriff's Office.
How long have you been employed with the Churchill County Sheriff's Department?
12 years.
Do you have any training, experience, or education that qualifies you to be a Churchill County Sheriff's Deputy?
Yes.
Do you have any training, experience, or education with respect to animal cruelty or neglect?
Just practical experience on the job.
And to how many reports of animal neglect have you responded?
Since I've been a patrol deputy, upwards of animal calls, 20.
And how many of those cases involved horses in particular?
A good majority of them.
And per your training and experience, what criteria do you use to determine whether a horse has been neglected?
Just conditions of their surroundings, conditions of how their body is. Like Deputy Bell was saying, the protrusion of the hips, protrusion of the ribs, the spine, and again, environment. So.
And were you employed by the Churchill County Sheriff's Department on September 6th of this year?
Yes.
Were you on duty at 1:15?
Yes.
And did you have the occasion to respond to a report of possible animal neglect?
Yes.
What information did you receive that caused you to respond?
I was dispatched to 3594 Hillsborough. We received an anonymous complaint in reference to some horses that have been neglected or in bad shape. And to name one, there was a buckskin stallion that was reported to be down and dying at the time.
So did this tip reference any particular horse or any particular condition?
One horse.
Okay.
Yes.
And so where did you respond?
3594 Hillsborough.
And is that within Churchill County?
Yes, sir.
And what did you do upon arriving at that location on that date?
I arrived at the residence. I found the gate to be locked. Looked around the residence, honked my horn to see if anybody would come to the gate. I made no contact with any resident, anybody on the property. Due to the fact we got a report of an animal in distress, I felt that it was my duty to go on the property and check on that animal. So I hopped the gate and checked on the condition of the animals.
And what conditions did you observe?
I counted 34 horses on the property, all varying in sizes, all varying in condition and age. There was one in a shed that was centralized on the property. There were two sheds together, and to the south, I'm sorry, to the east of those, there was some corrals, but inside the shed, there's two buckskins, if I'm not mistaken, and the shed to the north, there was one that the buckskin was down. I observed the buckskin to be malnourished. It was covered in flies. It could barely get up. It was laying its own feces, covered in its own feces, and it looked like it was dead upon my initial response. So,
And did you observe any of the other horses?
a majority of them were thin. Again, spines, hips, ribs protruding on a lot of them. Not all of them, however, there were some that were, again, like I said, it varied in condition. There were some that were worse than the others.
And did they look as though they had been fed?
Not that day.
And was this property entirely fenced off?
For the most part, yes. It was.
How were the horses being stored?
The layout of the property was there's a big pasture to the east, which pretty much divided the property in half, it seemed like. There was a single wide mobile home, if I'm not mistaken, on the north side of the property. And in the center of the property, almost in the middle of it, was the two sheds and several corrals to the east of those that contained, the younger horses. And there were a couple outbuildings that, I don't know if they're being used. I don't know if there's items stored on that property from the previous tenant, but there's a couple outbuildings on the property.
So the area where the horses were located was divided in half, more or less. Is that correct?
Well, it was divided up, not so much in half, but
So one half. What was one half?
it seemed like the property was pasture-wise anyway. There was half the property that was residence, corrals, outbuildings, and the other half of the property was nothing but an open field for a different number of the horses. Not all of them, but just a few.
How many horses were in the pasture area?
I can't recall.
What were the conditions of the pasture area?
It was basically a sand lot with flooding from irrigation overflow on the north portion of that field. I wouldn't even call it pasture because there wasn't really anything growing on it. It was basically a sand lot with a flooded corner.
Was there any vegetation?
None.
Within that pasture?
None. There was. It looked like there was some cattails growing in that flooded area, but as far as edible vegetation for the horses, there was none.
In the corral area, first of all, how many panels were there? How many corrals were there how many spaces were available for each horse within the corrals?
There was several. I can't recall how many. I think there was 4. I believe there was 4 right to the east of those sheds. So
And how many horses were in each one of those
it
enclosures?
varied. It was I'd say corral panels 15 feet. So it'd be a 15-foot square pen, and I can't recall how many were in each one. It varied. I mean, there were upwards of 4 and 5 in one pen, and maybe 1 in the other.
Was there any food or water within those corral areas?
There was water. There wasn't food available at the time.
What did you do on that date as a result of what you saw?
I saw that there was several bales of hay on the property, so there was some food available, and I couldn't determine whether or not they'd been fed that day. There was water available to the horses, and the horse in question, the buckskin stallion that was reported to be down and dying, it actually got up and was walking around on its own. So I needed to speak to the owner of the horses. So unfortunately, she was not there. I left them a business card on the door requesting a call back and some explanation as to, details on the horses. And that's when Deputy Catlin spoke with her later on that afternoon.
Did the respondent ever contact you?
The following day, correct.
And so you did you return to the property on September 7th?
I did.
And who did you make contact with?
I made contact with Dorothy Robertson.
Did the respondent indicate whether she lived on the property?
She did. She told me she lived on the property.
Did she say whether she owned or rented the
She was
property?
renting at the time.
Did she ever make any comments to you as to whether she was boarding or leasing any of the horses?
No.
Did she make any statement in regards to ownership?
Oh, she claimed the horse to be hers.
Did she make any specific statements in regards to?
I can't recall.
Did you inform the respondent as to why you were there?
Right, I did. I spoke with her on the phone prior to that, and I arranged a time to meet with her on the property at 9 o'clock. I met with her at the property at 9 o'clock. She met me at the gate, and we walked around, looked at the condition of the horses.
So did she make any statements about the horses?
She said she knew that the buckskin paint needed to be put down. It needed to be euthanized. He's sick. She could not afford to have the animals vetted, and she knew some of them were sick. Several had sand colic, and one had shingles.
So she specifically told you that some of those animals were sick.
Yes, sir.
Did you discuss with Ms. Robertson the amount of feed and water these horses would need?
No, I did not.
So based on your observations, what did you do?
I contacted my supervisor, first of all. I talked to Sergeant Coleman in reference to the horses. He arrived onto the property, and we spoke with Ms. Robertson. We, spoke with her in reference to getting some help for the horses, and she had the understanding that if any assistance came out there, whether, solicited by us or solicited by her, she would be out of money, whether it be vet bills or any kind of fees that would be incurred by the horses and have to be paid. So I recommended to Sergeant Coleman that we seek the help of a veterinarian and get some follow-up as far as the condition of the horses.
Did the veterinarian come out?
Yes, sir.
What did the veterinarian conclude?
He concluded that the animals were malnourished, and there wasn't enough feed on the property for them to be sustained over, however long we were dealing with her. I mean, I think I saw 15 bales of hay on the property on my initial response, and I think only 2 or 3 were gone the following day. And for 34 horses, I'm not a horse owner, I'm not a horse expert, but that's not enough. I'm just being reasonable. That's not enough.
Did you agree with the veterinarian's conclusions?
I did.
At that point, did you explain to Miss Robertson what was happening with the horses?
I told her. I said, we're going to get the veterinarian out here. We're going to look at the condition of the horses, and this may lead to seizure. I'll let you know if that time comes.
Was there a time when the horses were seized?
Yes.
And where were the horses transported?
They were transported to Found Livestock Exchange on Trennell Lane.
Horse indulgence. Your Honor, I have no more questions.
You have any questions of this witness, ma'am?
Yes, sir. Do you know anything about body condition scale on horses?
Nope. I do not. Only from previous reports and discussing cases with other deputies. That's it.
So you don't know the difference between the body condition scale of a horse in scale 1 versus one at like 4?
No.
And what was the time of day on your first visit?
I think it was about, if I'm not mistaken, it was around noon. I don't recall, but it was at the latter part of my shift, so it was around noon.
And I was not on the property at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Did you make any effort to contact me through Deputy Bell, who had my phone number?
No,
Did you know where I was?
no,
So you don't know whether I had been gone for 10 minutes or 10 hours?
that's correct.
Okay. Were there in the various pens and along the fence for the back field any feeders, tubs, anything in which horses would be fed?
There were some containers. There was an old bathtub in one of them. And I didn't see any in the individual corrals, but yeah, I did see some in that back field.
You didn't see any 55-gallon barrels with rectangles cut out of them?
I don't recall.
How many tubs were out in the field?
I don't recall.
How big were the pens in which the horses were kept?
They seemed like it was one corral panel square, so it was, I'd say 15 by 15.
But you don't know.
I don't recall.
Were all of the pens the same size?
I don't recall. I didn't measure.
And you don't have an accurate count of how many animals were in each pen?
Correct.
How much do you think a horse should eat a day?
I am not a horse owner. I couldn't tell you.
So how do you know whether or not the amount that was fed was, quote, adequate?
Well, when there's 34 horses and 3 bales of hay gone through, the reasonable person would think that that's not enough.
Do you have any indication, any knowledge that I did or did not bring in additional hay when I came home?
I do not. I can only act on my observations, ma'am.
Do you know how much the hay bales weigh?
I don't.
Do you know how much they measure?
I don't.
So you don't know how much hay was in an individual bale?
Correct.
And you don't know how much hay an individual horse should have per day? Or
Correct.
per feeding?
Right. I don't know. I'm not a horse owner. I don't have that much experience on horses. Just, you know, the horses calls that I've responded to.
When you came on the second visit,
Okay.
on the 7th,
Okay.
do you know anything about sand colic? When I told you that the horses had sand colic, do you know anything about that?
I have a brief understanding of it, that the horses ingest sand and it gets stuck in their bowels and it's a sickness. So
Do you know the effect on the horse in terms of their dietary intake and their weight?
no.
Do you know, did I tell you that there was a horse with shingles?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what shingles is?
No. I know it's a skin disease.
Did you see a horse with a skin disease?
Yeah, there was if I remember right, it was a paint colt with the hooves that were curling up for being untrimmed, who had open sores on his front legs.
Do you know the difference between shingles, strangles, and a photosensitive sunburn?
That's why I solicited the help of a veterinarian, ma'am.
Do you know that horses don't get shingles? Did you tell me when you came on the property that you had resources and could help, since the veterinarian would not allow my horse to be seen unless I had a full payment in advance?
I'm
So-
sorry?
Did I tell you that the reason the animals couldn't be, the buckskin paint stallion could not be seen was because the veterinarian would not allow me to take the horse unless I had full payment. He would not take payments.
Right, you advised me of that.
Did I also tell you that I was attempting to find work and to sell things in order to raise the money to get the horse seen?
You advised me of that also.
So I was making an effort, at least as far as you were informed, to get that horse seen.
Right. However, based on the condition of the horse, I had to act immediately based on the condition of the horse. The environment the horse was in, where it was kept, its current condition at the time, whether you were attempting or not, it didn't matter as far as the condition of the horse, because it needed to be put down right there and then. Even you agreed to that.
I had made the decision a month prior to put the horse down. I told you that too, did I not?
You did.
Your Honor, objection. Testifying.
Objection sustained. Okay, let's move along.
Did I tell you that the decision had been made to put the horse down a month earlier?
Yes, you did.
When the horses were being removed, how long did it take to get that done?
I don't know. I was relieved by Deputy Catlin shortly after 2 p.m.
Were you told at any point that hauling same-gender adult breeding stallions together was potentially dangerous for the horses?
Yes. I have an understanding of that, but I was not told that day. But I do have an understanding of that.
Were you told, or do you understand that hauling adult stallions along in the same trailer, in the same section of the trailer with adult mares or with breeding age fillies, potentially breeding age fillies, was potentially detrimental to the horses or dangerous for them?
Right, but I wasn't there during the transport or loading of the horses. I only seen one horse loaded. In fact, the only horse that I assisted with was the buckskin that was in need of euthanasia.
Okay,
And then
was he
shortly
the
after
first-
that,
was
I
he
left
the
the
first-
residence.
Was he the first horse loaded?
No, he wasn't. But he was the only one I assisted with.
And he was able to
He
load the
loaded.
trailer himself?
Right, he loaded.
Okay.
Any more questions?
Not right now.
Your Honor, I've just
Go ahead.
of the tubs and containers you observed, did you observe any feed in them?
Not on my initial response, nor the following day when I came out.
And so far as the corrals, were there any of those corrals that you observed more than one horse in?
I'm sorry, repeat the question?
As far as the corrals, were there any corrals that you observed more than one horse in?
Yes.
And at any time did Miss Robertson admit that any of these horses were sick?
Yes, she did.
Okay. No more questions then.
Do you have any questions based on that?
How many was the maximum number of horses in one pen?
4 or 5, if I'm not mistaken.
And do you have photographs of that pen with 4 or 5 horses in it?
I'm sure I do somewhere. I provided a disc of photographs at the DA's office. I'm sure it's included in there.
Are
Which you
these
should
the
have.
photographs that you provided?
Yes.
Your Honor, the maximum number of horses in any of these pens is 3. Do you know the size of the horses or the ages of the horses or the size of the pen in which there were multiple horses?
I don't recall. We were dealing with a lot of horses that day. I can't recall an individual horse except for the one buckskin. That was the only one that sticks out in my mind.
So it's your statement that the panels that that the pins were constructed of were 15-foot panels?
As far as my understanding.
So if a pin had a panel across the end of it and 2 panels down the length of it, it would be a 15 by 30-foot pin?
If there was 2 on one side and 1 on the other, yes.
Were any of the panels longer than your estimated 15 feet?
I don't recall.
How much space does one horse take?
I couldn't tell you.
So how do you know if they were crowded?
Just being reasonable. That's what I operate on.
Do you by chance know the size of the pens that, or stalls that the fairgrounds has?
No, I don't.
Do you know the size of the pens or stalls that PMU mares are kept in?
I don't.
Do you know the size of the pens or stalls that the Lipizan Stallions with the Spanish Riding School are kept in?
No, I don't.
If you were told that the stalls at the fairgrounds and the pens at the fairgrounds are 12 by 10, would you consider that too small for a horse?
Yeah, but those horses aren't there for an extended period of time.
And you know, of course, that my horses were kept in their pens without ever coming out. You don't, do you know that?
I don't. I don't know that. Don't know that.
Do you know that the size of the tie stalls that PMU mares are kept in are roughly 4 by 6 or 4 by 8?
What is this? What kind of mares are these?
PMU mares, they're mares that are kept for the production
I
of
have no knowledge of what those
pregnant
are.
mare urine, which produces Premarin for women in
I have no
hot
knowledge of what
flashes.
those are, ma'am.
Okay. Are you aware of the size of the tie stalls that the Spanish?
Ma'am, I
breeds-
think you've covered enough about the stalls. He has no knowledge. Let's move along. It was just his opinion.
But he has nothing to back that up, that
Well,
it's
it's just his
detrimental to the
opinion,
horse.
that's all it is. It's just an opinion. And the court will
Based on-
take,
based
the
on
court will
education.
take in how much knowledge he has.
Okay. You state that the backfield was a sand lot?
Yes.
Are there other sand lot fields around town?
There's
Around the
many.
county?
There's many.
So that is not an indication of poor care?
I didn't say it was.
I'm
I just
asking your
described
opinion.
the location and the layout of the field.
I'm asking if your opinion is that that's an indicator of poor care.
That is not an indicator of poor care.
Lack of vegetation in a sand lot is common or not?
In this area, yes.
Okay. That's all I have for the time being.
Nothing based on that, Your
All
Honor.
right, you may step down. Call your next witness.
Your Honor, the state calls Deputy Catlin to the stand.
Mr. Mr. Catlin was under oath from the last hearing. You're still under oath, sir. You may be seated.
Yes, sir.
Please state your full name and spell your last name.
Kenneth Nathaniel Catlin III. Catlin.
Your Honor, at this time, do you want me to go through the
No, we've
okay.
already been through there.
Okay, so did you observe the horses in question that day?
Yes, sir.
And did you take photographs of those horses?
Yes, sir.
May I approach the witness?
Yes.
I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibits A through P. Do you recognize the photos?
Yes, sir.
And you have all the photos, Mr. Robertson?
I'm not
No,
sure,
no,
these are
Your
not
Honor.
labeled.
Do you recognize the photos?
Yes, sir.
And how do you recognize those photos?
I took them.
Do they fairly and accurately reflect what you remember, the observations upon that day?
They do, with one exception. Some of the photos that were taken had been taken once the brand inspector and I had moved some of the horses around as we're getting them loaded. So the number of horses in the pens will not be exact based upon the photos.
Okay. Your Honor, at this time, will the court admit State's Exhibits A through P?
Mr. Robertson, did you look at those photos?
I did.
You have any objection? I'd like to take those with the markings on the back so she can, both her, she can look at them. She wants to object to one of the photos or all of them.
His ones have been labeled.
The
so
same
there's no
thing,
objection
but
here.
they got
Yeah, the
marking
same
on them.
thing. If you have an objection, you can reference the one that you're referring to, but based on the label on the back.
Are all those photos on that disc?
Yes, Your Honor.
She was provided, you have all the photos, ma'am.
That's what I'm checking here.
These photos are actually we blew them up and printed them full page for purposes of having a better picture of them. But she's been provided every one of those photos.
You don't mind if I check?
Which exhibits are they?
Did you have any?
Which exhibits are they? Pardon me?
These are the labeled
Here's the
ones.
close copy.
Which exhibits are they?
A through P.
A through P will be admitted.
These are not labeled, so I have no way of knowing which ones he's talking about unless I have labeled ones.
He'll explain each one as he goes along.
They're in order also.
Go ahead.
I'm showing what's been marked as Exhibit P. Can you tell me what that picture shows?
This picture shows, I believe it's on one of the younger horses. The hooves are extended. The front hooves are protruding out and bending up on this horse. I do believe this is one of the younger horses in one of the corralled stalls that Deputy Habinas had explained that were just east of the two main outbuildings.
Showing what's been marked as Exhibit O. Can you explain to the court what it is you're...
This is the backfield on the back of Mrs. Robertson's land. This is a depiction of the sandlot that the horses were kept in. Some of the horses were kept in the back. And this, as she described to me, was the water that the horses were getting from the field. It was irrigation runoff from the irrigation in the area that I guess pools at this location here, and she used that to water her horses with. And she had advised me that in the past, when there was more irrigation in that place, that the whole back of that lot was covered, not just this portion.
Showing what's been marked as Exhibit D. What does this picture show?
This picture shows two of the horses that were, get my bearings right. The fields to the east, so these horses would have been located in the area identified as the sandlot, but off to the north in a separate pen. These two horses were described to me by Mrs. Robertson as being sand colic, and she had separated those horses so she could take care of those horses separately.
Is there any observations about the horses?
One of the horses in this pen, and I don't see it depicted in this picture here. I'm not sure if I got it, but has a huge mass on his lip, his upper lip. It's protruding, swelled up, very large. I don't know what it is, but the brand inspector on scene advised that it was a sickness. I don't know more than that.
Okay. I'm showing you what's been marked as exhibit. Can you explain to the court what you're seeing?
This was the horse kept in the left of the two sheds that the panel pins are attached to. This horse is laying down. It did that a lot. It did finally get up when Deputy and I loaded this horse. We were able to get it up and get it moving to move. Very, very thin horse. The hips are showing. The ribs are there. There's flies all over it. There were maggots on the outside of this horse. It's laying in its own feces. The pen itself, I have to assume that round dish is a food dish, has an alfalfa inside. That's full of horse feces as well.
Excuse me, which number was that?
This is number M, as in Mary, ma'am.
I'm showing you what's been marked as exhibit I.
Yes, sir.
Will you explain to the court what it is you're seeing there?
This is the upright version of the same horse you gave me in number M. This is a depiction of its ribs showing, its spine showing, its hips showing, being covered in its own feces, and you can't see the insects because it's not a completely clear picture.
Did you observe any water or any feed in any of the troughs?
Of the actual panels that were put up, there were water in the panels. Each of the panels had a container of some of sorts that had water, and the water varied from being, you could see through the bottom of the bucket, pail, drum, whatever you want to describe it, to some of them being very cloudy and full of whatever it was full of. As far as food goes, there were some feeders there. A couple of them, I believe, were the large metal barrels that had rectangular spaces cut out of the top of them. They were all empty. One of them actually held rocks at the bottom of it. There was no food inside the pens.
Okay. Your Honor, I have no questions.
Do you have any questions of this witness, ma'am?
Yes, sir. You didn't take any picture of the maggots?
I take pictures of maggots. I did attempt to, ma'am. Unfortunately, the picture did not come out as clearly as I would like it to have
Did you
been.
remove any of the maggots and keep them as evidence?
No, ma'am.
On photo D,
D.
There you go.
Thank you, sir.
this is the horse that you claim has a mass on its upper lip?
I'm not there yet, ma'am. Miss number D. No, the one in the back, the dark colored one that you cannot see, it is depicted again on item number E. E is an Edward, ma'am.
Which photograph? Since
Show
I
her
don't
the
have
photo.
these
It's
numbers.
the
Show her the
dark
photo.
colored horse.
Okay.
It's the one right here. The really dark one.
Uh-huh.
Which horse you pointing to?
Your Honor, I'm pointing to this really dark one
The
right
one
here.
on the left?
Yes, sir.
Just for the record. All right, thank you. may continue.
Did you get a veterinarian's report on that mass?
No, I did not.
You don't have any photos of the mass.
It doesn't appear that I got the photos. I took the picture, but it looks like a piece of wood is in the way of its mouth, so no.
You don't know whether or not that horse has at some point suffered an injury in its earlier life?
No, ma'am.
I have to go to a meeting.
Okay.
Just never.
Okay. What time was it that you arrived?
I arrived and I relieved Deputy Venus a little after 2 p.m., ma'am.
What time were the horses normally fed?
Don't know, ma'am.
So if they were fed much earlier in the day, it would not be unusual for feeders to be empty.
Okay.
Yes, no?
You gotta put that in the form of a question.
Okay, if the horses were fed much earlier in the day, would you expect there still to be feed in the feeders? Say, for instance, they were fed at 5 o'clock in the morning. Would you expect there to be feed in their feeders at 2 in the afternoon when you arrived?
I don't know, ma'am. I don't know what was fed or how much was fed, if they would eat all of it or leave some left. Don't know.
And you don't have any idea when the animals were fed?
No, ma'am.
Did you ask?
I do not believe I did.
Are horse owners required to feed at a time that is convenient for the sheriff's office to see?
No, ma'am.
Are horse owners required to feed at any particular time during the day?
Not to my knowledge.
So they can feed around a work schedule, if they get up early in the morning, if they're night people. If they go to work at 1 in the morning, they could feed at midnight?
Sure.
Okay. How often are horses required to be fed?
I have no idea, ma'am. Best I could offers a guess.
Well, since opinions seem to be working here, a guess will work as well. How often do you think they should be fed?
I would guess that a horse should be fed a minimum of once a day, perhaps maybe twice a day.
Okay. Is there a requirement in the law regarding how often horses should be fed?
Let's move along. He said he doesn't know. So let's find some other line of questioning. He doesn't know when a horse is supposed to be fed. He's not a horse person. So let's move along to some different questioning.
Okay. Are livestock allowed to drink out of the irrigation ditches?
I would assume so, ma'am.
Is there any reason to think that irrigation water would be harmful?
Yes, there is. As irrigation runoff comes down from the different farms and the different chemicals that get put into those ponds, that's concern for not just animals but other life.
And yet livestock drinks out of irrigation ditches.
Okay.
Is the sheriff's office picking up animals that drink out of irrigation ditches because of potential harm to them?
Not to my knowledge.
So your point regarding the irrigation overflow pond here is?
I'm sorry, ma'am, can you repeat the question?
Your point regarding the irrigation overflow pond here was what?
Was that was the only water allotted to those horses. That is what my point was, ma'am.
And how much water does it look like there is in that photo?
Ma'am, I don't know. I couldn't tell you how deep the pond is or approximately how wide it is. I could, if you'd like, I could do an approximate math and give you maybe some volume, but that's about the best I could do for you.
Have horses historically drank out of that pond?
I have no knowledge.
How long that pond existed?
Don't know. All the information I've got on that pond is what you provided me, ma'am.
Do you know if the chemicals included, the fertilizers and stuff that are included in irrigation water has passed EPA requirements for animal safety?
Your Honor, I'm objecting to this line of questions. This is all calls for speculation, and none of it is of any relevance to what's going on in this case.
I'm sorry, Your Honor, but
You wait till it's your turn to speak, ma'am, all right?
He's answered the questions. She's asking him to speculate in regards to EPA standards. He's not here to testify in regards as an EPA expert. It calls for speculation. Further, none of this is relevant to what the hearing today, the evidence being presented. It has no bearing on what's going on with the facts in this case.
Now you can speak.
Your Honor, the implication has been made that the water is of poor quality and not good enough for the horses. Other livestock drink it, and I'm asking if he can show me that it's poor quality and not good for the horses, which would indicate a level of care.
Well, the court will take judicial notice that the animals drink out of the canals, and so we can move along. That's the water is, if it's in the irrigation ditch, it's safe for the animals to drink.
You mentioned rocks in the feeders.
Yes, ma'am.
Are rocks in the feeders detrimental to the horses?
Don't know. That's just what I saw inside the feed. What I saw inside those feeders, or the feeder, rather.
Okay.
Any further questions?
No questions based on that.
All right. How many more witnesses do you have, Mr.?
I have one more.
How long do you think this will take?
Half hour.
All right, we're going to take just a short recess.
Thank you.
All rise.